All right, thanks everyone for joining us for what is week 3 now of our Fundraising During Uncertain Times series. If this is your first time with us, I'm Austin Detweiler. I'm the managing editor of Philanthropy Daily. We're an online journal of news and opinion focused on the nonprofit sector generally. But recently, obviously, we've been devoting most of our attention to discussing fundraising and philanthropy during the coronavirus situation. So we're trying to provide resources for nonprofits and donors in the midst of this really unprecedented time. So far, the webinar has covered major gifts and direct response, and today, at last, we're covering events. As you may have heard me say in the past, our goal today and each of our webinars is to leverage our shared knowledge and experience to determine the best way forward in this unprecedented fundraising environment. We've got no magic solutions, but strategic thinking and some practical wisdom to find the best ways forward. To that end, we're especially glad to have Janine Ryan joining us today to talk about events. Before we jump over to that, I want to remind everyone to please send your questions through the Q&A function. We'll review and get to as many as we can. We're even still working on answering some of the questions from last week, so please send them in, and we'll get to as many as possible. Also, just a reminder to keep an eye on Philanthropy Daily for our articles related to coronavirus and the developing situation here. Late last week, you may have seen a summary that we had about the 5 key things in the CARES Act affecting nonprofits. And very soon, we'll be writing about SBA loans and other government benefits, which you'll want to see if you haven't looked into those yet. As we turn to events, I also want to keep in mind the situation with regard to quarantine measures and shelter-in-place orders and so on is changing very rapidly. There's a lot that is up in the air. We don't know how fast things will turn to normal, both in terms of government restrictions, but also like people's social comforts with getting together. So while we're looking towards the future in terms of scheduling or rescheduling events, much remains in flux. We've also said several times on these webinars that it's essential always, but especially now, to stay near, dear, and clear with your donors. This applies as much in terms of events as anything else. As Justin and Janine will discuss in more detail, you want to be in touch with your donors constantly while you're thinking through your event plans and figuring out how to retain all of that anticipated revenue. So a key part of this is going to be engaging donors virtually. Unsurprisingly, I was listening to a webinar last night, and one of the panelists quoted Leon Kass, a Jewish scholar, who was thinking about the silver lining of this isolation measure. He mentioned the rehumanization that we might see from public spaces. Because of the isolation, we're all hungry for friendship and for social contact. That's something we're usually talking about at Philanthropy Daily. When we're not thinking about isolation, we're usually talking about the importance of association, getting together. So I find myself nowadays taking my kids for a walk, and everyone, from 6 feet away is more eager than ever to smile and wave and say hello. We're all sort of feeling, in other words, how bad loneliness is. Hopefully we'll emerge from this crisis a little more humane, a little more interested in civil society. For now, the important thing for you with that is your donors are more eager for personal contact. So whereas the virtual events might normally seem like too much work and too much time for too little return or too little real engagement, that probably doesn't apply right now. You might have seen Jim Perdue, the chicken guy, saying thanks to everyone who gets chicken to stores and families. Normally, you probably don't care to hear from Mr. Perdue, but now people are more interested. My favorite example of this, last night I was invited to a virtual beer tasting with the head of Victory Brewing Company and a few thousand of my closest friends. I probably wouldn't normally go online to watch someone drink beer, but if I can't drink with my friends, I might have a drink with virtual friends. My point here is that the same rules don't necessarily apply right now. So some organizations you'll see are hosting virtual walks or virtual runs. There are virtual discussion forums, even virtual talent shows, which I'm sure are extremely intriguing. I saw one place is offering a live stream of a Shakespeare show, and they're offering virtual donations. So let's think through a lot more of that. Justin and Janine have a lot to say. So Janine Ryan is our special guest today. Janine is the director of events at the Heritage Foundation, where she oversees an events department putting on actually thousands of events each year. So as you can imagine, Janine is quite busy right now determining how and when to cancel events, how and when to reschedule events, and brainstorming creative solutions and new ways to meet virtually. So while she's in the trenches, so to speak, addressing these issues in real time, she's a great resource to help us think through these issues. Along with Janine, Justin Strife is with us again. Prior to becoming a partner at American Philanthropic, Justin helped run, plan, and organize events of all sizes, including galas raising $1 million or multi-million-dollar conferences, raising money from sponsorships, major gifts, and registrations. Even before the isolation and this webinar series, Justin's led virtual events, including national town halls digitally. Like you, Justin and Janine both haven't faced this scenario before, but they've spent a lot of time gathering event support, planning event support, and now thinking about how to convert event revenue and event engagement into this new scenario. So with that, Justin, I will kick it over to you.
Thanks, Austin. Appreciate that. And just a reminder, we see some questions coming in. Keep on typing your questions into that Q&A feature, and we'll get to those here as soon as myself and Janine are done. But feel free to submit those questions anytime. So to start, I want to cover kind of two things. First, what events are supposed to be doing, and events should be doing really two things, and they go hand in hand. And we're talking about fundraising events. They should be advancing your mission or raising money in order to advance your mission. The event is not a thing, an end unto itself. These fundraising events are focused on advancing your mission or raising money for that. So you need to have that mentality, and we should, all of us as fundraisers should have that mentality when we're thinking about new events, or even thinking about, like we are right now, about how to transition them and what to do and how to approach our donors. Does the event advance our mission, and is it raising money in order to advance our mission? In either case, canceling an event can be bad for donor and staff morale. It can also be devastating for a lot of organizations when it comes to cash flow and annual budget. Many organizations are very reliant on events. With that in mind, I really wouldn't recommend completely canceling events. Janine will talk about some options to move them online and virtual and how to keep donors engaged in that way. But from a fundraising perspective, if you're having a fundraising event, canceling it is devastating. Why? Well, especially if you're event heavy, you need the event to raise money, and you need money to run your mission. So no event, no revenue, no mission. So find a way to do that event, or find a way to transition event dollars so they still come in potentially without that event. And we'll get into that. Of course, given the current crisis, we need to get creative. And again, Janine will talk about that, about what are those creative options you can be looking at. But I want to talk about regarding the event revenue specifically. So regarding fundraising, you might encounter funding issues with already paid sponsorships, or just tables, for example, at a gala, or just general event sponsorships from corporations or just major donors. And then you've got the pledged ones that you're waiting to come in. Those are sponsorships or commitments. Then you've got your pledge drive that you might have had at the actual event, or a silent or live auction that you might have had planned. There's revenue from that. And then on top of all that, if you were doing paid tickets and registrants, you have all those individual ticket purchases and all those fees along with it. So you've got several revenue streams coming in for events typically. And then layer on top of that, if your organization hosts program events where maybe it's for a student seminar and they need to pay $79 to go to that event, or $89 or whatever it is, well, canceling that event, you're starting now to lose program revenue. So you need to be thinking through that. So there's really 4 or 5 channels here where by straight up canceling an event, you could be really canceling 4 or 5 channels of revenue. So you need to be thinking about that. So I want to address these channels and talk about some solutions here for them. So regarding already paid table sponsorships and general event sponsorships, and also pledged sponsorships and commitments, what do we do with those? Realistically, these typically are going to be coming from your major donors and your closest supporters, the people that step up and say, I'm going to, I'll be the lead sponsor or on the host committee, and here's my 10,000 or 50,000, or maybe it's a massive event. Here's my, $500,000 check or whatever it is. Those are going to be typically the people you know pretty well and are close with. So the main thing with them is, as we talked about in our major gifts, our very first webinar in this series, was you need to be communicating with these people. You need to be reaching out to them, and reaching out to them very fast. Again, anyone that had already made a gift to the event or was planning on it, or someone you were planning on asking for that major gift to that event. And regardless of where you are in terms of canceling or postponing or restructuring, and Jeanine, again, will say more about that, please reach out and let your donors know what's going on. Communication here is paramount. You cannot over communicate when you're canceling or changing or altering your largest event of the year, or really any event. Thank them for the support when you reach out. That's number one. Thank you so much for making this event possible, or the past events possible. That's key. Thanking them, that cultivation and that stewardship. Remind them of why their funding is so important, why their support is so valuable, and tie that to your mission. Again, it's not, Austin, your $10,000 was going to allow us to have, the premier wine at the event. No. That $10,000 was going to fund this program, this food bank, whatever it is. That's what you need to tie it to. And then continue from there. Remind them of why that's so important. Remind them of why the wine is nice, but the food bank is critical. And then remind them of what your organization is trying to achieve through their support. So don't just say, no wine, food bank. Talk about that food bank. Talk about what you're doing right now with that food bank, the increase in demand, the increase in the need. Communicate that to them. And again, remind them how their support makes it possible, and thank them for that. Once you've done that kind of cultivation and of that donor and thanking them, you need to we should be moving into a redirecting, asking them to redirect that gift. So, again, I'll use Austin. I'll pick on Austin. Austin, you made that $10,000 for that table. We really are sorry you're not going to be able to have your guests there for that wonderful event. However, our mission goes on. Would you be willing to transition that gift over to a general operations support, or even program specific? Right now, again, food bank. We need resources over in the food bank. Would you be okay just redirecting that and talk about that with them? Give them options for restructuring their gift. Just work through it with them. But especially for your major donors, the approach should really be, how can we transition this from event to programs and mission related? Again, all of this really communicating that the point of the gift is to advance your mission. The point of it is not to host the event. That's just kind of the middleman. And to some extent, you're cutting out the middleman here. You're taking cash directly to the programs instead of, having that service fee essentially taken out of that gift, which is the event. So you also want to avoid a donor thinking you don't need the revenue because it was for the event. Again, in fact, the gift for the event was in order to advance the mission. And then, as always, make sure that you're up to date on budget numbers when you have these conversations. Don't go in blind and just say, I'm just going to thank them and ask them to move their gift around. We don't know what donors are going to ask, and so we need to be prepared for as many questions as possible. So be prepared with what was the event budget, what was the impact that you were hoping to get out of it, how many people were you expecting to be there, what is your projected revenue loss from not having the event now or having to transition into some other format. How many people were you expecting? How much money were you expecting from sponsorships versus tables versus individual tickets? Again, they may not ask these questions, but you really want to be prepared, especially because you're asking them to kind of pivot on their major gift. So we need to be prepared for those questions. That kind of covers those major donors and those big donors is communication and really working with them to tie that gift to the mission and not the event. So what do you do about individual tickets, event registrants, the pledge drives, the auctions, all that revenue that was kind of day of or smaller level revenue? The reality is a lot of this revenue was going to come from smaller donors at the event, people buying the $100 thing at the silent auction or whatever it is, or the $80 ticket purchase. It was going to come from smaller. So as soon as you've reached out to your major donors and communicated to them what's going on, you need to be immediately communicating to all the other registrants of the details. What are you moving? How's the event moving or transitioning? What is it going to look like now? And talking about their gift and really talking to them about how you can transition it. Hey, I know you registered $125 for that gala and we can't host it. We're going to do it online now. Can we redirect your gift, in this way? For many of these, you might not even have to actually talk about redirecting. It's just the event is just moving online. But if you get questions, talk about redirecting it. Give the donors, as you're talking to them, multiple options for moving from event to general operations or program specific or what something along those lines. Be sensitive. These are tough times for people. So as an option, hey, you can do these 3 things. Number 4 is we can give you a refund. We can do that if you want, but don't lead with that, and communicate why, you can do a refund, but you really could use it in these other areas. Again, the food bank is in need. We've had our biggest lines ever, or whatever it is. Really communicating that. And again, from my experience, I don't know about Eugene, a lot of donors are willing to work with you on this, and their kind of sunk cost is there. I already gave you the 125. Go ahead and put it where you need it most. But that's why that communication is so important. And again, communicate and contextualize everything within your mission, your vision, your goals. Just be honest with them about what that event was going to do for your mission, how much you were going to raise, why it was so important for your mission. If you can, when you're reaching out to these thousands or hundreds or tens of thousands, whatever it might be, donors that are at the smaller level, talk to them in a real way, and also try to make a compelling argument. Put a video in front of them with your CEO, go hitting the food bank here again, in front of the food bank and showing that need right there and really bringing that mission home, near and dear and clear, as Austin said, to the donors. That would be really important. So think about interesting things you can do like that video. It's tough. We're all at home. So, but as Austin noted, the Purdue guy, if you haven't watched the Purdue CEO, he just did a selfie outside of a truck outside of one of their warehouses. Thanks so much. Your CEO can do that quick video at his or her home, thanking donors, asking them to, attend the virtual event, tying it again to the mission. So, and then the big thing here is also communicate to donors. There's no longer an in-person event, which means that their gift, their $125 check to get that seat at that gala, is actually fully tax deductible at this point. There's no wine, there's no food, there's no event space or anything like that. So the $125 gift, which may have only been $25 deductible, 100% actually at this point is deductible. So there's that added benefit. And tie that in when you're talking about refunds and redirecting the gift. And then if you had a pledge drive of some sort planned at the event, I find a tasteful way to still make that ask. Again, you could do that through the CEO video or some other means, a letter, emails. But the reality is, and I said this in the Major Gifts webinar in the first week, we hear people say, I shouldn't ask. And I sympathize with that. But if you are like many nonprofits and you don't have boatloads of money in the bank just waiting for a rainy day, you need revenue coming in right now. And the only way to get that revenue is to ask. So we need to continue to ask. We just need to be sensitive to what's going on. Again, reminding donors of your mission and your value, not coming across as begging, but we need to ask and again, be sensitive. So that's, to wrap up, a couple points here, 4 bullets to really wrap up my remarks, and I'll hand it off to Janine. First is, again, be clear and honest in your communications with your donors. You cannot be overly clear, you cannot be overly honest, you cannot over communicate. So don't worry about that. Tell your donors what's happening with the event. Be very clear. Tell them it's canceled or it's transitioning. We're figuring out what it looks like. We'll be in touch in a couple days, and then let them know what it looks like and bring them along that stage. Again, over communicate. Be honest with what's going on. Do not shy away from saying, the plan was to raise X number of dollars for our mission from this event. We were planning on $1 million of our revenue comes from this event to make the food bank or whatever it is possible. Without that, we're tough. We're facing a little bit of a crisis. Let's talk about that and what you can do to keep the event going and keep those revenues coming in. And finally, just keeping in mind mentally for us, and if and when we need to communicate it to our donors, the point of all these events and everything is the mission, not the event. And that's something we should be thinking even outside of this current pandemic or any crisis. The point of the event is your mission and raising money for that mission. It is not the event. And we need to get away from, as all fundraisers need to get away from communicating and selling events as, here's the wine, or, that kind of stuff. Get to selling the mission, and that wine is an added benefit to, them having bought into that mission. So get creative with that kind of communication. With that, Austin, I'll pass it back to you and let you hand it off to Janine.
Thanks, Justin. That was great. I'll hand it right over to you, Janine, and then after Janine's remarks, we'll jump into Q&A.
Great, thank you. Justin, I couldn't agree more. What you're saying about mission being critical and selling the mission, the event is a pathway to do that, but it's not necessarily the only way to do that. And so when you're in a situation where you can't have an event, you got to find a new opportunity in order to sell that mission. And so you're right on point. As Justin and Austin both said, it's an incredibly difficult time for everyone. Our donors, our organizations, our partners. And it's important during this time that we're doing exactly what we're doing here, coming together and learning from each other and figuring out how we can come out of this much stronger. What we're really seeing on the event side is that we're all being challenged in two critical areas: the reality of possibly canceling events that will bring financial burden alongside it. And then the second being that we really need to reimagine what it means to have an engagement strategy, that it's not just an event, but there's multiple ways to doing the engagement strategies, including going virtual. So on the event cancellation side, just to start, right now we're seeing in most cities that there's a shutdown through April, and some of those cities are even shutting down through June. And there's drastic shifts that we're seeing on a daily basis, as Austin was saying, that the severity of it is really increasing. And so we're constantly needing to evaluate where we are in these decisions. So the first thing I would suggest is really evaluating in 3-month increments. This allows you to see kind of what's upcoming and evaluating that compared to the situation at hand in the environment, and especially depending on the city and everything else surrounding the logistics. Pull in stakeholders and start engaging in different scenario planning and risk assessments. This really allows you to see, if we postpone, what does that look like? If we cancel, what does that look like, both financially, from logistics, all of the above, and really allows you to make a really smart decision versus just going into it, flipping a coin. The other thing that we know is that many of these decisions to cancel events can be very personal, whether it's for the team that's in charge of the event or the organization at large, because we've been doing these events for years without disruption. And so it can feel like a very personal decision to be made. But we really got to look at the times and evaluate, does the financial cost of doing an event really outweigh the burden that might come alongside it. So there are questions that you can ask to help provide clarity on whether you should postpone or cancel an event. Those could be, does the event fall in a critical time period where we're seeing the virus escalate? Is it in a city or an epicenter of where the epidemic is currently happening, like New York City? How are your donors doing? Do they have the capacity to give right now, or just the mental capacity to think about giving right now, or attend an event? As Austin was saying earlier, that what we're seeing in social distancing and people being nervous about gathering, that's going to last for a while. And so it's not just, in June, things start getting better, businesses start opening, and then all of a sudden people are going to want to gather. So really thinking through that, and are they ready to hear our message? And then are there opportunities later in the year, whether you go virtual with an event or you're applying the different strategies that you had in the spring and the summer to a fall event that you already have on the calendar? What you don't want to do is postpone an event that then is going to conflict with an event that you have in the fall or later in the year. You want to make sure that you're not, over engaging your audience once we come back online. And then how much will your organization suffer if you lose this event? What does that look like for you? As you go through the decision-making process for postponing or canceling events, I encourage you to stay in touch with venues and vendors and attendees and donors. Austin and Justin both mentioned this as well. Keep them informed of the timeline of when you're going to make decisions and what that plan might look like. And also lean in on your donors and ask them for advice. They aren't experts in this area, and they may not know the business as well as you do, but they'll appreciate having a seat at the table and help you set the stage for how you might ask a gift later, or how you might re-engage them once we're back up and running. So what happens if you're ready to cancel? What does that look like? So first thing, be smart about it. I would definitely engage your legal counsel if you have access to legal counsel. Do a thorough review of your contracts. What you don't want to do is make a rash decision to cancel and then realize you're just in a horrible financial position to cancel, and that your contract doesn't really support you to cancel. You could easily, by shifting a strategy in how you're negotiating cancellation, you could get in a situation where you're losing tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in cancellation fees. So look at the strength of your force majeure clause, your impossibility clause. and also the terms of your cancellation. So what is the penalty? How many weeks, how many months, how many days out are you? And what does that penalty look like? Hotels are really at this point trying to hold on to every ounce of hope that improvements will happen quickly. And so it may take them a bit to actually agree to letting you invoke a force majeure clause. We've seen recently, even, Heritage is in the midst of these negotiations, that it's been very hard to invoke force majeure clauses for June. A lot of hotels are just, wanting to hold out and see if they will be opening up back at that point. But we also know that the physical event is not the only trigger for making these decisions. It's also all the lead up. It's the promotion. It's asking donors to register for an event and book their travel when there's public communication happening about cities closing down and, not hosting gatherings at all. And so how do you actually have those communications? So what we've seen very effective on our negotiation side with hotels is talking about not only the inability to host the event directly, but also the inability to market the event due to the gathering restrictions or to the audience's concerns or fears. And that fits really closely into an impossibility clause in a force majeure. Even as you protect yourself, definitely respect the contractual agreements that you have. You have to keep vendors and the venues in mind. As you're losing money from one event, they're losing money from hundreds, potentially thousands of events. We've seen, Marriott chains and Hilton chains really suffer during this time. And so we want to keep them in mind. And that doesn't mean that you've been to benefiting them more than your organization. It just means that the way you communicate, the way you approach these negotiations has to be like a true partnership. Once this is all over, we'll be knocking on their door again to host live events. And so it's important that you've maintained those relationships throughout that time. And finally, reimagine event strategies and go virtual. The virtual event marketplace is quickly getting saturated. But if you had an event planned and you have attendees that regularly attend these events and are engaged participants, then you have a captive audience to pivot quickly to an online event. In my article this morning on Philanthropy Daily, I outlined several ideas for different online event models. I'm not going to go through each of them right here because there's a lot of ideas that are out there. And it's definitely a helpful and useful list to start with. And I bet many of you actually have several ideas that you could bring to the table as well. But the whole point is to make sure that the needs are clear and that there's a goal and there's focus. And again, that you're selling the mission. You're selling the mission of the organization and designing your online engagement in that same manner. So, you also have to look at the purpose of why you're going to be hosting the event. Is it to advance your mission? Is it educating constituents? Is it cultivating donors or prospects? Or is it raising money? And you can tailor your event to meet those needs. As we know, online events are imperfect imitations of an in-person event, but there are creative ways of dealing with the current situation, and donors will be glad to see that you're actually being creative and coming alongside them and working hard to stay in touch with them and remain active and pushing your ideas out there. They want to know, just as much as they want to know that they're going to be okay during this time, they want to know that your organization is also going to be okay during this time, and they want to support you through this. So I look forward to ongoing discussions, taking questions, and I'll turn it back over to you, Austin.
Thanks, Janine. That was excellent, and thank you, Justin. The first thing I want to mention, Janine sort of started her remarks about the importance of supporting each other and learning from each other right now. So if you do take some time to look at Janine's article at Philanthropy Daily this morning, feel free to throw some ideas into the comment section. There's a lot of different ways to go virtual right now. And I think all benefit from hearing from one another, also specific recommendations about how to do it. A lot of us are not the most tech savvy people. So if you do have some ideas, feel free to share and help us out. One question I want to take quickly, Justin mentioned that if you are able to convert a gift for a ticket registration or a table sponsorship into a general operations gift, it's now 100% tax deductible. That's because normally for an event gift, the tax deductibility is reduced by the value of goods or services received through the table or the dinner or whatever's going on there. If the event isn't happening, they're not having dinner, they're not having a drink, then the entire value of the gift is tax deductible. So make sure you communicate that to them. Let them know they'll get a new tax receipt. You know, you previously gave $100, you know, bought a $100 seat and it was a $90 tax deduction. Now it's a $100 tax deduction, and we'll make sure you have the paperwork to reflect that. Another question I want to throw over to Justin. Someone asked if this is a good time to ask for more money than was previously given, or if they should stay maybe with historical giving.
Yeah, this is tough. This is what everyone's kind of wondering. I mean, one, should I even ask? And number two, boy, I was going to ask for an upgrade a month ago or 2 months ago, and I don't know if I should do that now. And these are very, very tough questions. So my answer to them is again, what I said, you got to keep on asking and be sensitive, because again, your organization needs revenue. You get revenue by asking. So you've got to keep on asking, but we need to be sensitive. So reflect on who that donor is and where they might be. And hopefully your database is up to speed. Hopefully your cultivation and donor notes are totally updated. So you know exactly who the donor is, maybe what industry they're involved in, those kinds of things. So you can kind of start to guess if they've been impacted and how much they would have been. But it's tough. And so if you know, okay, they're in such and such of industry, the restaurant industry, and you were going to ask for an upgrade or renewal, I might be pretty sensitive about that and maybe push that off completely and just stick with cultivation right now and how's it going with them. But others are actually doing okay right now. I was working on a donor situation too, actually recently, where two different organizations were unsure, what should we do with this donor? We were going to ask for a big upgrade. We're not really sure what to do now because of what's going on. And my response was, these two people were involved in the stock market and very successful. And I said, just go out to them. They might actually be doing okay because they're incredibly successful investors. Just go and see, ask them, just say, this is about this time of the year where you give, we, you know, of course are hoping that you'll renew. We understand that this is a difficult time for a lot of people. But a month ago or 2 months ago, we would have honestly been asking you for an upgrade, but we're not so sure that's the thing we should be doing right now. Would you be willing to jump on a phone call and talk through what's going on with you right now and what's going on with the organization, and then work through that? The two donors that I know of where that happened, they actually said, yeah, I'm doing okay. You know, I got out before everything, and I'll definitely be renewing. I might even be upgrading. That said, I also have been working with some donors who make things. They're manufacturers, or, you know, they're in the service industry, the retail industry. And they're telling, you know, organizations, I got nothing, you know, I'm getting hammered here. So you got to balance that. And this just comes back to what I was saying, is having a clear and honest conversation with your donors and being sensitive. When you type that email, it says, you know, can we talk? But I also want to be sensitive to what's going on. And I want to be, you know, considerate of what's going on in the world today, but can we talk? And then work through that with your donors. A lot of this is built up on you having excellent cultivation with your donors, you know, years of getting to know them and their family and their business, and you can have that honest conversation with them. But anyway, so short answer is, if you're going to ask for a renewal or an upgrade, proceed being extremely sensitive to the industry the donor might be in and the situation they might be facing. But don't be overly sensitive or presumptuous and say, oh, this guy's got no money. That can actually be kind of insulting to people. If you say, well, I know you might not be able to afford that $20,000 gift anymore, so how about we do 5? Well, I don't know. Maybe that donor is actually totally fine and we just completely insulted them. So it goes both ways, and it's just a lot of sensitivity. But we've got to keep moving forward with asks. That's how fundraising works.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Janine, I'm going to throw you 2 at the same time. I imagine that probably Heritage does really high-end, you know, event invitations to some of your bigger events. So someone's wondering whether right now it makes sense to do just digital save the dates to save money instead of mailed, just in case they end up canceling. They haven't invested money in the printing and mailing. And related to that, what about doing an invitation to a virtual event in later in the summer and the fall? But mentioning it will be in person if it's possible. So sort of leading with both options.
Yeah, and I think the 2 great questions. The first one, doing event email marketing, I guess there's a couple different factors there, depending on the quality of the day that you have on them. What's great right now is that there is a lot of resources that are freed up in organizations just based on certain programs not being able to happen. And so I definitely think email marketing is a great way to go and save the money on the printed invitations, and then deploy those additional resources within the organization to make personalized calls to the people you may not have email addresses for. Really utilizing that personal outreach and that personal touch. But email marketing, I would definitely suggest right now, just saving cost and resources. In addition to all the disruption that's happened, through mail and all of that, it's just a much safer bet. Second question, sorry.
Whether it makes sense to send an invitation mentioning both a virtual option or an in-person option.
Yeah.
And that they'll let the donor know later.
Yeah, I think transparency is key. And I think it's okay to begin marketing things that are going to be happening in the summer, just with genuine transparency that we'll be providing both in person and virtual, and we'll be continuing to keep you updated on what might be happening. For sure.
Several people are wondering about how to work with or support older donors who are probably not tech savvy, maybe even haven't used computers, if you want to go virtual, if you still want to engage them. I don't know who wants to take a jump at that first.
Jeanine,
Yeah.
you got it. That's a tough one.
I will, I'll jump in. So I would say, we definitely at Heritage can understand that. I think that personal outreach, even from a solicitor, and being able to call them and get them engaged and talk them through how to potentially set up the environment to go virtual, and doing a tutorial outside of an event actually taking place. One, it provides a touch point for a solicitor to come alongside the donor, check in, see how they're doing, but it also provides an opportunity to let them know what's happening, what we're putting on a virtual platform, and give them that customer service that really we have the opportunity right now to step up the level of customer service we're providing across the board. And it's a great opportunity to do just that. Most virtual platforms nowadays have, the video opportunity, but there's also the call-in opportunity. I would say a majority of our donors have been very receptive to calling in and listening to events or participating in discussions that way. And so it doesn't have to be a one-track way for all of your donors. Some of the older donors who aren't as tech savvy could easily just call in. And there's some pretty easy systems for them to do that quickly.
Yeah, and top of that, I used to do a lot of national teletown halls, things like that, where donors, all they got to do is pick up the phone and call at a certain time, or you let them know we're going to call you at 2 o'clock on Sunday, for this teletown hall with our president or whatever it is. There's those options, but also if you're nervous about they don't have Zoom or go to meeting or whatever, and can they figure all that out? They got to download things. You can also record this, like this is being recorded. We're going to make it available online. Maybe they can't figure out all the Zoom stuff, getting in like we are right now, but they can sure click a YouTube link, the next day and watch that event the next day. So there's just, again, like some creative ways to think through this.
Yeah, and I also wouldn't underestimate, I think at this time, everyone is learning how to be virtual. Grandparents are talking to their grandkids virtually, whether it's FaceTime or other platforms. And so I feel like more and more different generations are learning new tools. So I also wouldn't underestimate the number of people who will be able to tune in virtually.
Great, thanks. Someone asked, they have a 500-person gala coming up in the fall, and they're thinking about pivoting to maybe 10 to 20 smaller house parties spread about throughout the fall. Any thoughts on changing from the big thing to more intimate events?
Yeah, so right now I would say we're holding tight on a lot of our fall events with hopes that we'll be able to still do those events. So I don't think there's a rush to make a big shift right now in that decision. So I think there's still time to be making that decision. Obviously, the ideal scenario is to have everyone together. There's a different feel, a different environment, a different dynamic when you have that many people in one location together. I think as you approach the summer and you're starting to really dive in 3 months out and looking into the fall in those strategies, doing those house events are definitely fine, but I would look for opportunities of how you could connect those different individual events that are happening. So is there a way to bring them together through a centralized platform, have part of the program that's going to be united, and then separate programming in those different areas. Global Leadership Summit, they do that. Sorry, not Global Leadership Summit. There's several different networks that actually do that, where they have, you know, a centralized event that's happening for a larger population, and then they have these breakout events around. So you could do that centralized platform virtually, and then have these separate breakout smaller group events around different areas.
Yeah, and don't discount when you're looking at this. You know, don't jump too early, because a lot of these events have cancellation fees, and so you know, if you're jumping now about an event in 6 or 7 months, you know, you could be facing stiff cancellation fees, and then no event, or it's all cleared up by then, and you could have had the event in the end. Just be monitoring those, right, Janine? I mean, because there are windows there, and hotels are being sensitive to that and canceling events a couple months out as things roll on. So yeah, just those cancellation fees can be stiff. And even then, I mean, Jeannie, I think you'd recommend working with the hotel. Maybe you do want to cancel that September event. You internally have all decided that we're going to cancel the event. Maybe the approach is go to the hotel and say, can we shift it to next year, you know, or next spring or something like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we, so one, you know, looking at these contracts on a rolling basis is helpful because, as I said before, a lot of venues are, even in June, not wanting to invoke a force majeure clause or force majeure with you. So you're not, which basically means you are still at risk at paying cancellation fees. And so definitely evaluating on a rolling basis. But we've had, you know, one of our major donor conferences that happens every spring, the hotel was very willing to work with us, and we moved that event to 2022, which was the next time we were going to be on the East Coast for that event. So hotels want to work with you. You know, they're experiencing this on a much larger scale than we are within our own organizations, because they're dealing with, you know, different clients on a daily basis. And so the opportunity to bump it, even, you know, bumping it back later in the same year, or bumping it, you know, to the next year, is definitely a possibility and a very safe way to do it.
Yeah, and I just at a point, if most organizations are on calendar year, fiscal year, so a lot of funds are coming in that end year. If you have at the end of the year, if you have a September, October, November, December event, boy, you're waiting all year to get your big, you know, your checks, the most of your revenue. If you've got a September event, you're not sure what to do, and the hotel is willing to switch it to April or March, and now you've just potentially front-loaded your largest revenue event and your largest revenue generator to the beginning of the year, which makes, you know, the rest of the year a lot easier. You've got that cash up front for the calendar year. You're not waiting all year to get it. You know, this actually could be, in some regards, an opportunity. I mean, I wouldn't cancel too early, but if you're bent on it, consider moving early next year and getting that revenue early in your fiscal year.
I want to add something Janine mentioned in one of her articles that she published on Philanthropy Daily, because I never would have thought about this, is the importance of being really cooperative and friendly with all the venues and vendors you're working with. Especially if you're not hosting as many events as Janine and her team are day in, day out, those relationships might not be front of mind for you. But as she says, they're suffering now, and showing some, you know, talking with them through your own thought process about what you're trying to do and how you're deciding these things might make them more flexible with you. She even had the great idea of making sure you send thank you notes, or like small, you know, gifts after you come to conclusions together, which I imagine could go a long way with those. Similar to cancellations and contracts, what are your thoughts on signing a contract for an October event if it includes a clause that you can get the deposit back if it's closed because of coronavirus?
So I think if you can get the clauses right, and we've been spending a lot of time as an organization working with actually other organizations on what does the after action look like for this situation, and what are the changes that we need to make in contracts in order to protect ourselves for pandemics or unforeseen situations. And so I think if you can have a really strong clause that gives you protection in that, it's okay. I would say, wait until, there's a lot of push that's and deadlines that are happening in June. I would suggest, holding off, seeing if the venue will hold it for you with first right of refusal. So basically, if anyone else goes to them for those same dates, that they'll come to you first to see if you still want the space or you're willing to let it go. I would hold right now. There's no rush to be signing those contracts. Everyone's kind of in this weird hold, trying to figure out what they want to do. So definitely engage a venue. Definitely ask them if they can put on hold for you. And if you get into a situation where the timeline's getting tight and the venue is unwilling to hold it any longer, then just making sure that you have strong cancellation clauses and that you're protected, you can get your deposits back, and it won't be a problem. And so most venues, I think at this point, are going to be willing to work with you on that. I've been getting a lot of feedback from a lot of my peers talking about the contract negotiations that they've been having and the cancellations. And a lot of venues have been willing to tentatively hold space for the fall without contractually making you hold it. So.
If you have a fall fundraising event planned, do you suggest starting to reach out to donors right now? If you've been holding on it, is this a good time to be doing it?
You mean reaching out to them about if you're going to be hosting the event or not?
I think even save the dates, invitations, digital
sponsorship. Yeah, sponsorships, fundraising. Should you be asking for money for an event right now, or should you be holding?
So I think right now, I would suggest holding. I would suggest doing that personal outreach and the one-on-one conversations and reaching out to people at that level. I would say holding until kind of that June period again, that they're, right now it's a lot more critical feeling, and it's definitely feeling, for most people that we don't know what this fall is going to look like. And I think you can communicate, if you've already sent out something, I think you can communicate to your donors and your attendees that you're watching things very closely and that you'll be in touch with additional information, as you guys decide how you're going to be moving forward. But I think a lot of the more personalized outreach right now is the more critical approach.
Awesome. What about lowering the cost for tickets for fall events? Does that make sense?
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. It's you can always do some sort of sale later on based on July 4th sale or whatever it is. I would go with your normal pricing and evaluate from there. And again, you can always do discounted pricing later on, special sales, things like that. I wouldn't.
I agree. And I think if you have a particular donor or attendee who's reaching out to you and they want to attend, but they're struggling, you can handle those on a one-off basis. But for the masses, I don't think, bringing it down is really going to make a huge difference for people. They're used to what you're normally charging and they'll expect that still the same.
And you don't want to set a new level here. You just cut it in half and what are you going to do next year? Now double it? I mean, you want to.
Exactly.
That's helpful. This is sort of prognosticating and grasping at straws we shouldn't be, but do you have any guesses, Janine, on whether people should be tempering their expectations for late summer, fall events, scaling down attendance goals?
I would. I think it's, I think looking at your contract and seeing, in order to hit your food and beverage minimum, in order to hit your rooms, all of those with the attrition, can you still do that? And what is that base number that you need in order to not be paying fees on top of it? And setting that expectation with your stakeholders internally, with your board, with your executive team, talking through the fact that a lot of people it's not just about, is the virus currently active and is everything shut down and are people sick? It's also, how are people feeling about traveling? We've been even talking about when we bring everyone back into the building at Heritage, that will probably happen on a rolling basis, and it's not going to be everyone at one time. And we may not open up events in our building for a little bit while people are getting comfortable being around each other and gathering and making sure that we're safe. We've also been told that there's potential that this, virus may spike again in the fall based on weather and normal flu-like situations. And so I think it's just important to see, what is it that what is that critical mass you need to hit in order to not be at fault to your contract, but really setting that expectation internally that you might not see the same numbers that you usually do. It's not going to change the experience that you're developing and that design of the event, but really setting expectations, I think, is important.
This is sort of a really practical question, Janine, that I think you'll have some thoughts on. If you're thinking about postponing events, you've already made a later date for it or something, what's sort of the last second maybe to start sending save the dates if you're not sure? So normally you say like it has to be sent this far in advance. Are you changing your own plans about that?
Yeah, and we're also changing, how hard we're hitting people. So events that are being postponed, as I said before, and again, it depends on how big the event is. Are you asking people to come in from out of town, or are you asking people who are local? If you're asking people who are local and it's less of a commitment for people to travel to that event, then you can, reach out to them, 2 months out, 3 months out, and be pretty safe. I would say if it's a much bigger event where you're pulling people from all over the country and they need to make travel arrangements and all of those different details, then I would say you probably want to start reaching out on a personal level, 4 or 5 months out, and then start doing mass communications, further in within that window. So around that 4 or 3 months out.
Awesome. I see 2 questions here that I'd like to jump in on. One, well, also just people are asking what kind of subscription services or whatever, what kind of options do we have for going digital? And again, there's Zoom, and I know these can get expensive and you have thousands of people, Zoom is $900 something a month if you're going to be into the thousands. Luckily it's cancelable. You can, it's month by month. So if you got an event in May and you're expect 1,000 people, get it, spend the $1,000, then cut back. Way cheaper than a $200,000 event or whatever it was. So think about that. There's the teletown halls. These things, they could be super cheap. I used to do these. They were, pennies for each person you called. So it's just as you go up in terms of the interaction and the technology, it gets more expensive. But at a minimum, teletown halls, you can be doing these for, a couple $100 really at most often. And then I also see someone asking, when should we start putting contingency plans together if for a fall or a late fall event? And what I would say is really generally everyone should be putting together contingency plans. You should probably, I'd recommend having, 2 or 3 contingency plans in place right now in terms of budget and revenue. A November event happens, November event doesn't happen, no events happen. What other budget cuts are there? Just looking at all of that. So really, I would encourage everyone to have several contingency plans. Don't spend weeks doing this, but have a few in place. You just need to realistically, we all need to be thinking about where things are going to go here. In terms of, starting that process now in terms of thinking about when to cancel. I think Janine, you covered that, but if folks are asking about contingency plans, budget-wise, expense-wise, you should have hopefully several together to account for all this.
Great, thank you, Justin. I'm gonna wrap us up there. Thanks so much for your time, Justin, especially Janine for yours today. That was extremely helpful. By way of a few final closing things, someone asks again about tax deductibility. If you're not doing the event in person and they keep their gift, it's now 100% tax deductible. And someone also pointed out in the Q&A box that you should communicate to your donors that the gift now goes further, right? You're not having to pay for the venue, the food, the speakers and everything, unless you still bring in speakers virtually. So they'll be happy to see that their $150 ticket or their $10,000 table sponsorship now advances your mission even further. That's a great point. And some sort of final points, definitely be tempering expectations in terms of events that you'll host, just so that you're internally, and your venues and vendors know, and make sure that you're looking closely at contracts, cancelability now, and then in the future that you're working all of that in there to everyone's benefit. In terms of where you can find the articles that we refer to, it's philanthropydaily.com. We'll drop that in the chat box there so you can see it, but you'll also receive an email tomorrow mentioning it. The past webinars on major gifts and direct response are both there. There's a button right at the top that says webinars, and we'll get this one up there tonight or tomorrow as well. As we said before, if you have virtual ideas, please drop them in the comment box there. And if you have more questions, please be in touch with me or with Justin. We will drop our email addresses in the chat box here in a moment, but you'll also receive an email from Justin tomorrow. Thanks again for your time. We'll be back next week, same time and place, your living room at 2 o'clock to discuss foundations and grants. We'll have foundation representative with us, and we'll be discussing staying in touch with foundations, bringing in foundation gifts and everything, and how to do that right now. That is all I have today. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Janine.